murder of Kaliah McNabb is a heart-wrenching case that gripped the nation not only for the brutality involved, but also for the deeply disturbing family dynamics that preceded it. The story of how a 15-day-old infant was killed by her father in Newton County, Georgia, in 2017 is a tragic example of the dangers faced by vulnerable children growing up in homes affected by abuse, neglect, and violence. This more detailed account delves further into the events surrounding Kaliah's murder, the psychological profile of her parents, the investigation, trial, and eventual conviction of her father, Christopher McNabb, while shedding light on the broader societal failures that contributed to the crime. Christopher McNabb and Courtney Bell were a young couple living in rural Georgia with their two daughters, an older toddler, and their newborn baby, Kaliah McNabb. Their relationship, however, was far from healthy. McNabb had a history of violent behavior and drug abuse. The couple's household was described as unstable, filled with tension, and marred by frequent drug use. McNabb, in particular, had a reputation for being volatile and had previous convictions for domestic violence, which painted a troubling picture of his behavior behind closed doors. Despite these red flags, Courtney Bell remained in the relationship with McNabb, though she too struggled with substance abuse issues. Their mobile home, where they lived with their children, was cluttered, chaotic, and unkempt, a physical representation of the disorder and dysfunction that marked their lives. The arrival of their second child, Kaliah, brought even more strain to the relationship. McNabb, it was later revealed, harbored resentment toward the infant, who required constant care and attention, needs that McNabb felt interfered with his own lifestyle. Courtney, overwhelmed by her circumstances, reportedly tried her best to care for her children, but she lacked support and was entangled in the toxic environment created by McNabb's controlling and abusive nature. The home was not a safe place for the children, and McNabb's drug-fueled aggression toward both Courtney and the children made the situation even more dangerous. Social services had not intervened, despite the glaring signs of trouble, leaving the family to deteriorate until the tragedy unfolded. On October 7, 2017, just 15 days after Kaliah was born, the events leading to her murder began to take shape. According to Courtney Bell, she had fed and changed Kaliah early that morning at around 5 a.m. She then placed her back into her bassinet, which was located next to their bed in the mobile home, and went back to sleep. When Courtney awoke later in the morning, around 10 a.m., she discovered that Kaliah was missing. Courtney frantically searched the trailer, but the baby was nowhere to be found. She immediately called 911, crying and pleading for help, stating that her newborn daughter had disappeared from her bed. During the 911 call, Courtney seemed distraught and panicked, describing how her baby had been fed and put to bed, only to vanish. She mentioned that she believed someone must have taken the baby. Meanwhile, McNabb appeared to be more composed, but soon began acting suspiciously. While authorities were arriving at the scene, McNabb's behavior fluctuated between uncooperative and erratic, raising suspicions among investigators. When confronted with the situation, McNabb tried to claim that an intruder must have entered the trailer and taken the child, though there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. As the police began their search for the missing infant, they expanded the perimeter to include the wooded area surrounding the McNabb and Bell residence. The search involved not only law enforcement, but also volunteers from the community. Just a day later, on October 8, 2017, the search came to a horrifying conclusion. The tiny body of Kaliah McNabb was found wrapped in a drawstring bag and discarded in a remote section of the woods, approximately 900 feet away from the family's mobile home. The condition of Kaliah's body shocked investigators. It was clear that she had suffered a violent attack. The medical examiner later confirmed that Kaliah had died from multiple blunt force trauma injuries to her head, including severe skull fractures. The violence of the injuries indicated that her death had not been accidental, but the result of an intentional, brutal assault. The extent of the injuries suggested that Kaliah had been beaten with extreme force, likely by someone who was in close proximity to her when the crime occurred. Given the location where her body was found and the evidence of severe head trauma, authorities quickly concluded that Kaliah had been killed inside the mobile home, and her body was later discarded in the woods in a hasty attempt to conceal the crime. Investigators now faced the task of determining who was responsible for this heinous act. From the outset, suspicion fell squarely on Christopher McNabb. His behavior during the investigation raised numerous red flags, particularly when he abruptly fled the scene after learning that his daughter's body had been found. This flight was seen as an immediate indication of guilt. McNabb was soon located at a nearby gas station where he had been hiding, and he was arrested for questioning. As the investigation continued, more evidence began to pile up against McNabb. His prior history of violence, drug abuse, and erratic behavior painted a picture of a man who was prone to dangerous outbursts. He had a reputation in the local community for being volatile and untrustworthy, and many who knew the couple had witnessed his abusive behavior toward both Courtney Bell and their children. Authorities also discovered that McNabb had made troubling statements about Kalia in the days leading up to her murder. He had expressed frustration with the demands of caring for a newborn and had made offhand comments suggesting that he did not want the responsibility of another child. These remarks, combined with his suspicious behavior in flight, were enough to warrant further investigation. The autopsy of Kalia McNabb revealed the full extent of the horrific injuries she had sustained. The medical examiner determined that the infant had suffered multiple skull fractures consistent with blunt force trauma. These injuries were so severe that they could not have been caused by an accidental fall or mishap. They were clearly the result of deliberate violence. Further forensic analysis of the crime scene linked McNabb to the murder. Investigators found a blood-stained T-shirt belonging to McNabb near the area where Kalia's body was discovered. The pattern of blood splatter and the position of the body indicated that Kalia had been killed inside the family's trailer before her body was placed in the woods. Investigators theorized that McNabb had likely killed Kalia in a fit of rage. They suggested that McNabb may have been under the influence of drugs at the time, which further fueled his aggression. After killing his daughter, McNabb then placed her body in a drawstring bag and attempted to dispose of it in the nearby woods, likely hoping that it would never be found. Following the discovery of Kalia's body in the mounting evidence against him, Christopher McNabb was formally charged with malice murder, felony murder, aggravated battery, and concealing the death of another. Courtney Bell, though not accused of participating directly in the murder, was charged with second-degree murder for her role in allowing her children to be exposed to such a dangerous environment. McNabb's trial began in May 2019, and it was marked by intense courtroom drama. The prosecution argued that McNabb had killed his daughter in a drug-fueled rage, possibly due to frustration over the responsibilities of parenthood. They presented evidence of McNabb's violent tendencies, his drug addiction, and his hostile attitude toward Kalia. They also pointed to the forensic evidence that linked him to the crime scene. One of the most damning pieces of evidence presented by the prosecution was a jailhouse phone call between McNabb and Bell. In the recorded conversation, McNabb expressed anger toward Bell, blaming her for Kalia's death and suggesting that if she had kept the baby quiet, the tragedy might not have happened. This call further demonstrated McNabb's lack of remorse in his attempt to shift responsibility onto Bell. Throughout the trial, McNabb continued to deny his involvement in Kalia's death, even though the evidence against him was overwhelming. His behavior in the courtroom was erratic, with frequent outbursts in which he declared his innocence and claimed he was being wrongfully accused. However, his volatile behavior only further convinced the jury of his guilt. After just over an hour of deliberation, the jury found Christopher McNabb guilty on all counts, including malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated battery. McNabb was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Courtney Bell, though not directly responsible for the murder, was found guilty of second-degree murder and child cruelty, and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with the first 15 to be served behind bars. During the sentencing, the judge expressed profound horror at the brutality of Kalia's murder, emphasizing that the child had been completely defenseless. The judge described McNabb's actions as an unforgivable betrayal of parental duty and an act of extreme cruelty. The murder of Kalia McNabb remains a deeply disturbing case that has left a lasting impact on the community and beyond. The case highlighted the devastating consequences of domestic violence, drug addiction, and child neglect, and it raised serious questions about the failures of social services and the justice system in protecting vulnerable children. Many have argued that more could have been done to prevent Kalia's death. given the clear warning sign of danger in the household. For those involved in the case, particularly the investigators, the community, and Kalaya's surviving sibling, the emotional toll of the tragedy has been immense. The case continues to serve as a painful reminder of the need for vigilance in protecting children from abuse and ensuring that those responsible for their care are held accountable. Kalaya McNabb's brief life and tragic death stand as a symbol of innocence lost in the face of brutality, and the story of her murder will continue to be remembered as one of the most chilling and heartbreaking cases in recent memory.